Thank you, Imran. I was told that I could talk about anything that I wanted to, which is terrific. So basically, I thought I'd talk about the things that interest me. And that really is about how the video games industry, which is a really, really fun and wonderful industry, is changing in the most extraordinary ways. Despite my boyish, youthful good looks, as Imran says, I wrote my first game in 1981. So I've been privileged to be involved in the industry right from the very beginning. And in the last few years, things have changed so rapidly for a variety of reasons, which I'm going to talk about. But before then, I just wanted to put a perspective on the games industry. Now, we've always had a bit of an inferiority complex. We've always liked to sort of compare ourselves to other industries. So here we go. Basically, in the UK, the retail entertainment value of of games last year was £2 billion, which is just slightly less than video and DVD sales, and we dwarf music. And a sort of interesting statistic to sort of put it in perspective is that Grand Theft Auto 4 was the highest ever entertainment earner within the first 24 hours, earning $310 million. Against Spider-Man, the film, Spider-Man 3, which was $60 million, and Harry Potter, which is $220 million. So there's no doubt that the business is very successful and very big, but things have not sort of developed quite as smoothly as they should have done. And this is basically the main context of my talk. So I also thought, because I've been around for such a long time, that maybe I'd give you a little bit of a history about the industry as well. So let's start off. Oh no, sorry. I'm going to have to go back one. Is that control on the Mac? I'm not quite sure. How do I go back one?
Hit the cursor to
All right, perfect, thank you. It's very sensitive, this. Right, well, the industry in the UK and indeed in Europe started very much with the release of the ZX81 by Clive Sinclair, Sir Clive, as he was later to become, based in Cambridge. And I don't think anybody at that time had any idea where it was going to lead. I was at university studying mechanical engineering. I'm really sorry, that was a waste of a place, and went into games. But I really didn't have any confidence in the industry. I refused to leave so stayed at university and did it as a part-time thing, because I don't think anybody had any idea how it was going to grow. And we were in a sort of Sinclair cocoon for a few years during the early 80s, because we knew that in America there were Commodores and things and Apples. We had no idea what was going on in Japan. Of course, Nintendo was being very successful, but we were really only concerned with what was going on in Europe. And it was a very interesting time because somehow it appealed to our psyche. We were very, very good at developing video games. And within Europe, we basically had the best developers. There was almost no competition from abroad. People from France and Germany in particular loved the video games, and they bought an awful lot of them, but they weren't producing them, they weren't publishing them, and they weren't distributing them. So it was absolutely our area. And my first game was called Adventure Bee. As you can see, the packaging is very advanced. I'm deeply ashamed to admit that I actually designed that logo at the top. It is truly appalling. And you can see the sort of quality of it was what's called a text adventure. And the interesting thing is that there was an enormous following for these games, because what they did, compared to what people were used to in terms of their entertainment, was really special. A little bit later, we actually renamed Adventure Bee. I mean, it was called Adventure Bee because there was a game called Adventure A that had preceded it. And indeed, when I wrote my next game, it was called Adventure C. But then we came up with, Inca Curse. Another great adventure for the 48K Spectrum. And crappy as it looks, actually, it was really interesting, and there was an awful lot of passion. And what I want to talk about is, as a sort of glue to all these things, is how the relationship with the audience changed. And back in those days, we're talking early 80s, we used to meet our audience at what were called microfairs. We'd put tables up and we'd flog them our games. And the interesting thing is that they were just like us. And it was wonderful because they had a real passion for what we did. And obviously we felt very, very excited. And there was such a lot of, dare I use the word innovation? There was so much extraordinary innovation. I mean, one of the things that this particular publisher called Arctic Computing, that I later got involved with, did was a 1K chess program. Can you believe it? They wrote a really good chess program that ran in 1K. Now, a desktop is 4K. I mean, where that 4,000 bytes goes, I have no idea. But the sort of innovation that was coming from the constraints and the fact that it was such a dynamic and an exciting industry, and we just had no idea where we were going. And even now, we're still at the point where we're driving this. And so if you're not innovative, if you're not excited, and if you're not enthusiastic, then don't do it. But if you are, then actually you can change the way things are. My God, in the early 80s, it was all about that. People without any idea what was going to happen, driving things down different routes. And almost certainly, had we approached it in a different way, then the industry would have developed in a different way. I don't know. Okay, so those were the sort of the halcyon days. They were wonderful. We dominated our market. We were protected because the competition from abroad were on completely different formats. We were the best in Europe by a million miles. And then some interesting things happened as we move into the late 80s. Big publishers came along, very well funded. And those publishers started controlling the supply and demand. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. There are a number, anybody who's into games will recognize the US Golds and the Oceans. Activision was an American company that came in early. And the audience, the view towards the audience changed absolutely enormously because a lot of kids, particularly young boys, were drawn in. And basically they would buy anything that was a license, always heavily advertised, or what they recognized. And very quickly, the publishers developed an enormous contempt for their audience because the audience would buy the shiny things. They didn't actually, whether it was a good game, whether it was quality, was almost irrelevant. And I went to work for US Gold and enjoyed it enormously. But the interesting thing was that within the hierarchy of the company, you know, number one was marketing, because it was all about marketing to these people. Secondly was sales, because you wanted to get, and then thirdly was development, and development was a pain. Now, a company of that size would have probably 20 to 25 people in the development department. In those days, there was me and a tester. And seriously, and I said to the boss, I remember, look, this is insane. We've got this is the game that we were working on. You'll recognize that, some, Outrun. First one, on Amstrad CPC, Spectrum, Commodore 64, Atari ST, and Amiga. And I said, we don't have, you know, we can't test them all with one person. It's just impossible. To which his reply was, don't worry, we have several 100,000 people out there. They'll test it for us and they'll let us know if there are any problems. And that was very much the attitude at the time because of, you know, the way that these publishers had really created, I would argue, a disconnect between the audience, and they saw the audience just as a way of making money. Then, towards the late 80s, we also got Nintendo coming in with the Nintendo, the NES, and the Master System coming in. And that skewed the market as well, because we had a lot of kids that were playing those, you know, consoles, and their older brothers were playing on STs and Amigas. The relentless march of technology also had an enormous effect in that the production values were raised so inextricably, and they just relentlessly went on and on. And here are some of the games that I've worked on. Arctic Soccer, football, in 1983, I think it cost us about £200 or £300. Certainly the adventures that I paid, well, I never got paid for them, but had I been paid for them, I would gladly have accepted £200 or £300. 10 years later, we wrote our first game, which is called Lure the Temptress, on Atari ST and Amiga, and that cost £20,000. That was an increase of 100-fold in 10 years. 10 years later, we wrote Broken Sword 3. That cost £2 million. So that was a further increase of 100. So basically, in a period of 20 years, the cost of development has increased by a factor of 10,000-fold. Now, clearly that is going to have a profound effect on the way that games are both consumed and indeed developed. And what has happened, and again, this is, you know, to go back to the sort of Norman idea, what Norman was talking about, when things were costing £20,000, actually there wasn't an enormous risk, and people could be innovative, and it was an amazing time. But through the 90s, when things were costing $1 million, now they cost $100 million, suddenly the risk was so high that actually the innovation was out. Before, you'd have a small group of people, or maybe one person, who was an innovator. He really understood, or she really understood, what the market was, and they would make a decision there and then. Slowly and relentlessly, decisions started being made by committee. And that destroyed all the innovation. It destroyed everything, because it was all about sequels, licenses. You know, what can we absolutely guarantee will make money, will make a profit. And what that then led to in the 90s, where we're now talking about games that are costing anything from £50,000 to £1 million, was that there was a lot of profit, and we fell the way of all the other entertainment industries, in that big publishers, primarily Japanese and American, came in, bought our indigenous publishers, and controlled both the supply and the demand. They sign up the artists exclusively, and then they would control distribution. They'd control the way they could be promoted, games could be promoted on Windows and things, and they became very powerful in exactly the same way that record companies did in the 60s and 70s, in that they could control the artists and they controlled the retail. Film studios did, obviously, well, particularly in the 40s, when they controlled both the studios and they controlled the movie theatres. So ultimately, like all of these, we went down that route where the big publishers would dictate what would be published, how much it would be sold for, and where it could be bought from. And that gave them an enormous level of power. And this is exactly why they put all this money in to control the marketing and everything. And this is why I would argue the 90s was quite stagnant in terms of innovation. Things just really iterated. Things were built. So here's my picture of the businessman who sat there with no interest whatsoever in actually what the product was. It was all about making money. And I mean, one of the lessons that we have learnt in games is that you really do have to have a passion for your product. Otherwise, you're not going to do very well at all. And you know, to give you an idea, and this is meant to be a feel good, by the way. It sort of gets a lot happier by the end. But I worked with our publisher. Was originally Robert Maxwell's Microsoft, and for those of you young enough to remember, he fell off his yacht under very suspicious circumstances. But anyway, his company, Microsoft, disappeared overnight, and we went to work with a company called Virgin Interactive, who were absolutely brilliant. I mean, just fantastic in Europe. In America, on the other hand, in contrast, the person who ran it was really proud of the fact he'd never played a video game. I mean, now you laugh, but I swear to God. And like so many people, they set up in Silicon Valley and they set up in California because actually they thought they wanted to be film guys. They were slightly ashamed of being involved in games. And the stories from that era are quite extraordinary. And the product that came out of it was things like the interactive movie, which was basically clips of movie where you made a decision, which these guys, who really had no connection with the audience whatsoever, really, really thought was what people wanted. And so to use the theme which I agreed, which, you know, maybe we've gone off topic, but as far as the audience was concerned, there really was a disconnect between the audience and what they wanted. And so these big publishers sort of really drifted because they just didn't understand that actually what people wanted was games. What, you know, they wanted to go to the movie theatre to watch movies. They wanted to play games at home. You know, they wanted the medium in its own right. And then it all changed because Sony came along with the PlayStation. That was in 1996. And it was interesting because the guy who basically set it all up, a guy called Phil Harrison, within Europe, phoned me up and said, look, we want to talk to the best developers in the UK and in Europe. we've got this new machine, can't tell you much about it, but come along and talk to us. And the success of the PlayStation was because right from the beginning, they engaged with the developers in a way that all the other console manufacturers had utterly refused to do. And that was why they were so successful. And then what they did is they pumped these machines into nightclubs and cool places, and they sponsored cool people. And suddenly the image overnight, within a year or two, completely changed. And the interesting thing then was that the loyalty of the audience was again completely different. But that audience was loyal to Sony and to PlayStation. That was who they saw their loyalty to. And we did very well. We published games through PlayStation. And Sony were an excellent company to work with. But the interesting thing is that the PlayStation was very, very much 3D. We produced a game called Broken Sword on the PlayStation 1, which people thought was going to be a disaster because it was a 2D game, and actually it was really, really successful, contrary to everybody's expectations. But the interesting thing about the PlayStation, that being primarily 3D, was that while it drew in a whole new generation, it got the teenagers and the university goers, and it crossed the gender divide, and it was an extraordinary thing. It also alienated people who were maybe not as visceral, who didn't want as visceral a gaming experience, particularly older people, maybe women, people who wanted a more 2D experience, because ultimately, in truth, the 3D looked crap. It did, didn't it? When you consider what it looks like compared to what you get now. And so you really had to understand the grammar. You had to understand, you go into this world, which was 3D on a 2D screen, and it was pretty difficult to navigate. So the hardcore loved it, but actually it alienated an awful lot of people that really went away for a bit. So now we move on to the 2000s. All of us knew that the 2000s was going to be a battle of technology between PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. We knew it because we'd seen it all before, and it was coming to the clash of the titans. We knew who we wanted our audience to be. That's the rock chick dressed up in leather and holding a joystick, because we like that sort of thing. But actually, it didn't turn out like that at all. What it really turned out to be was the Wii and the DS. The Wii with no power, so little power compared to the 360 or the PlayStation 3, or the DS with even less. And this strange controller that was a gimmick, the idea that you pull out a touch pen and there are two screens. There was enormous cynicism, and I am incredibly impressed that the people at Nintendo really got it, and they got it, frankly, ahead of us, and they certainly got ahead of the other console manufacturers. And who was our real audience? Our real audience was everybody. It was men and women and young people and older people. And the extraordinary thing is that actually by following the Wii and the DS, we really have followed two different roads. We've got this is everybody now, and then the hardcore is still, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox are brilliant machines. And, the top-end software, the Call of Duties, the GTA 4s, are extraordinary entertainment products. But what's happened that I don't think anybody expected is this sort of schism between the two, that these lower-end, fun machines are pulling back the audience that we lost when they were alienated by the move to 3D under PlayStation. So, where we stand at the moment is we have games like GTA 3 that cost $100 million to write, and they sell to a fairly hardcore audience. What's interesting about the games that are being written for Wii and DS is that they cost $1 million downwards, so 1%, and the risk is much, much, much lower. And it's really destroyed, it's part of the reason that everything has changed. But it gets worse, because what's really, really screwed up the status quo is digital distribution. And it has had a profound effect, because 4 or 5 years ago, we knew that the way a game was sold was that the retailer would charge 50% for stocking it, and the publisher would then take 80% and they'd pay you 20%, which equated to 10% of the net retail, and that was it. And there was no way around, because ultimately they controlled everything. They controlled the source of money, they controlled distribution, the retailers would buy from the distributors would buy from the publishers. Now we're working with people like Apple, and we get a 70% royalty, because it is, and as you can imagine, that has completely changed everything. Everything is up for grabs. Obviously, it's not quite that simple, because you need to fund it yourself and you need to market it yourself, and there are other elements that the publisher would have done, but it's thrown everything up, and it's offered the most extraordinary opportunities. Now, we're not unique in this. Other industries, exactly the same thing has happened. In the music industry, the music labels, who, according to the publishers, have been absolutely decimated. Their labels fought against the tide of change, and they lost. And meanwhile, the artists have been really innovative in the way that they've decided to reach. It's clear to them that actually you sell records so that people will come to your gigs. So, the Arctic Monkeys gave away their singles free so that people come to the gigs, so therefore they became popular, so therefore they could make money. Radiohead gave away In Rainbows, one of their albums, and said, pay us what you think it's worth. But really smartly, they charged £40 for the special disc box, so their real hardcore fans would actually pay a lot more on the basis that everybody was listening to the music, because even if they didn't like it very much, they could listen to it for free. And that's part of how the world is changing in games. And at the risk of offending anybody in the film or television industry, not that it worries me, because it's not something I normally worry about, I think we've actually been pretty good at changing and adapting, because we are probably in the most, it's the least developed of the industries, it's the youngest of the industries, and actually we're still probably slightly in the mood of, actually, well, we don't know what's coming up in the future, so we're very happy to, just take it as it comes. So I'm going to argue that actually to succeed, what you really need to do is you need to build or rebuild the relationship that we used to have with our audience, the one that was based on respect, a mutual respect. And that if that can be done, and when that's done, then actually there are huge, huge, huge opportunities. And that's why, as small developers, we have a huge advantage over our competitors. So, for example, games, a lot of the publishers fight piracy, and I think piracy is at the root of it, a lack of respect, for whatever reason, by the audience for the product and the people selling them the product. So, some of the publishers put on draconian DRM, digital rights management, but then the people who are consuming it, the gamers, are turning around going, well, we can either go through all this crap, or we can just download it on BitTorrent, and we don't have any of this shit. And so it's actually counterproductive. It's actually driving people away. And I think this has been very damaging and continues to be very damaging. And I think it's one of the reasons why a couple of months ago, some of you will probably remember, in the European elections, that Sweden's Pirate Party actually won a seat. It was obviously in reaction to the Pirate Bay, which is a Swedish Pirate Bay, being closed down, and the guys being given extraordinarily lengthy, I can't remember if they're given huge fines or jail terms. And I think there was a sort of knee-jerk reaction about that. But clearly there's a big fight at the moment between the idea of, the publisher who owns the IP and the people who are consuming it, going, this is just not fair. Why should we pay £40? And I think this is at the very heart of where the relationship is that we need to build. So Revolution is a very small company. It used to be 30 people. Now I work with a group of colleagues. We have no employees whatsoever. And I'm actually rather proud of the way that we deal with our community. We have, our Broken Sword games have tend to sell about 1 million copies per iteration. So, we have tens of millions of people who've actually played our games. And we've got a good number of people who are still very loyal and still follow our forums and everything. So, what I aim to do is, one, communicate directly in a completely non-patronising way, which a lot of people don't do, and a lot of publishers don't take their audience seriously. They don't, if somebody complains. So if I get difficult emails, I will answer it personally, because I think it's really important, particularly when people are cross. And often, not often, sometimes we get, emails saying, I really love what you do, but In this particular case, I was very disappointed. And if you don't actually give them a personal reply, if you don't actually give them a knowledgeable reply about why that happened, then you're going to lose that person. And if they're an opinion leader, which they almost certainly are, then you'll lose all the other people as well. So, the other day we got a phone call, and I was asked to talk to this lady because she'd got our number from somewhere, and she was stuck on one of the games. And so, there were two thoughts. One is, God, I've got to finish this game. I really can't. And two was, hang on, this is an old lady who's probably 70. Why is she playing our games? I really wanted to know. And so obviously I was delighted to talk to her. And, I actually learned an awful lot more from her than she did from me. To begin with, she said, look, this is what's going on. I said, you don't need to tell me. I know exactly what, I know where you are, I know why you're stuck, and I know exactly what's in your inventory. Don't worry, let's go through it. And it took an awful long time to try and explain how to do it. But the point is that then at the end, she phoned up, she was so excited. She said, I played this game twice. There are photos at the end, are you one of them? Bloody, bloody, blah. And the point is, it's actually quite easy to enthuse people, as long as you're enthusiastic yourself. The second big thing is price. I think GTA, Call of Duty, £40, absolutely worth every penny, no question at all. But my view is that there are going to be maybe a dozen of those a year, and the rest are going to be right down in price. But the point is that, I'm going to talk in a moment about some of the games that we're going to be producing. But given that if we sell them directly, we get 7 times the revenues than if we go down the traditional route, we can afford to bring the price right down. We can sell things for £2 or £3. That, in terms of revenue, we'd earn the same revenue as if they're being sold at £25 in retail. So that's a huge, huge, huge fact. And certainly I'm looking to really, if wherever possible, actually communicate, sell at a much cheaper rate so that actually we can, build this trust with people. Because, frankly, if you like one of the games that Revolution produces and you're not prepared to pay £3, then I'm not sure we're ever going to get you. So, good luck. Steal it. And then the final thing is the ease of use. And I think iPhone, the App Store, the Apple App Store has been absolutely brilliant at making it easy to buy things cheaply, buy songs cheaply. And certainly my kids, I was shocked to discover that they were using LimeWire. Well, I knew they were using LimeWire, I just didn't know what LimeWire was. Now they buy their, because they knew that it was wrong. They knew that it was wrong, but now they get the stuff through the App Store, and it's part of this. It's part of all this idea, the communication, the sense that you're actually working with somebody you respect, the fact that it's cheap, and the fact that it's easy to use. So this is a game that we wrote in 1994. I had not in a million years would I have thought that actually we'd ever see it again. We're about to release it on iPhone in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. It looks great. It's a story-based thing. It's got the same resolution as it had all those years ago. And we actually gave the game away on PC because why not? And the extraordinary thing is that now we have so many people that played it. It's called the most widely played adventure ever, more than Monkey Island. Monkey Island's better known, but more people have actually played this. And for £2, they might as well come and play the remastered version, which has got new content and stuff. So that puts us in a great position. Another game, Broken Sword, that we wrote 10 years ago, we did a director's cut, wrote a director's cut, and has sold really well, got fantastic reviews, got an average of 8 out of 10 on the DS. And this is against, obviously big titles, so I felt very proud of that. So who is our audience? For the reasons I've gone through, I hope that we've built a very good relationship with our audience. This is one of our unofficial websites, Rev Fans. I've got no idea who they are. There's, Broken Sword Planet. There's, we've got dozens of unofficial websites. There are people who put this stuff together. We give them the material, they put it together. I mean, what an extraordinary way to publicize. And these guys, I know it's obvious because you're all in this business, but, the fact that we don't support these guys means that they have a legitimacy amongst their peers, which is extraordinary. And then we obviously have the forums. I think anybody who doesn't take note of what's going on in their forums is an absolute fool. Because, you know, in the olden days, people paid so much money to get this market research. Now all we need to do, this is a debate about whether we should be in 2D or 3D. You know, Broken Sword 3, but little too edgy graphics. The fourth is much more polished. 2D all the way, which unfortunately isn't going to happen. Aha, you're wrong. I think it could happen, the handheld market, etc., etc. And so we spend an awful lot of time looking at the forums and what people are saying. You know, they don't know that we are doing this, but the point is that we are actually taking what people say extremely seriously. So, back to our community, and to sort of finish off. Certainly at Revolution, my view going forward is that the world of digital publishing has changed so inextricably and thrown up incredible opportunities for people who are prepared to tear up the rule book. Now, obviously, the big companies that have got backers from the city, blah, they're going to resist that because, you know, there's so much momentum behind them, there's so much overhead that they can't possibly afford to change. But for a company like ours, who actually own their own IP, who frankly never made much money from it, and who have a direct communication with our audience, I would like to think that we're in a strong position. But certainly, I mean, for any of you thinking about the games industry, it is an extraordinarily interesting and exciting and dynamic market to be in, industry to be in. And I hope that my whistle-stop tour of you know, the 80s and 90s and into, you know, this decade will give you some sort of background to what we attempt to do. Thank you.